One of the central tales of Norse mythology is the death of Baldur. Baldur was a son of Odin and his wife Frigg, who was such a beautiful man with hair and eyebrows white as snow, that the gods loved him and did not want any harm to come to him. Frigg therefore went through all of the worlds and made everything pledge that it would not harm Baldur. She made not just every sentient thing swear, but every rock, every tree, every kind of living thing. And she came back to Ósgarður, the realm of the gods, declaring that now no harm would come to Baldur. Once this had been done, the gods began to entertain themselves by playing throw stuff at Baldur, putting him in the middle of a ring and then having them throw spears or shoot arrows or throw rocks at him. And Loki, seeing this, became jealous. So Loki, who often takes different forms in these stories to accomplish his goals, takes the form of Fulla, Frigg's servant or handmaiden, and goes to Frigg and asks her if everything really swore that it would never harm Baldur. Frigg told Loki Fulla that, in fact, one thing had not sworn, that Vex vidar teinungur fyrir vestan Valhall. A young tree grows west of Valhall, and this is the mistletoe, and that it seemed too young to Frigg to ask it to swear an oath. And so Loki goes down to Midgardr, takes actually I suppose it's not specified where exactly west of Valhall is that this is growing, but he goes and he gets some mistletoe, makes a spear out of it, and brings it back to where the gods are playing throw stuff at Baldur. He hands the spear to Hörður. Now Hörður is Baldur's blind brother. He is at least Odin's son. He's probably Frigg's son, although that's not specified anywhere. And well, first Loki approaches Hörður and says, "Why aren't you playing throw stuff at Baldur?" And Hörður says, "Well, I can't see him." And Loki says, "Oh, well, let me put this spear in your hand, and I'll guide your hand and help you throw it." And so Loki puts this mistletoe spear in Hörður's hand and guides his hand and throws the spear, and that kills Baldur. And so Loki is Baldur's Róðbani, council killer, killer in council, but Hörður is the Handbani, killer by hand. Now, with his beloved son Baldur dead, Odin leaps into action and sleeps with a woman, specifically Rindur, and she gives birth to a son named Voli, who, when he is still 1 night old, having sworn that he would never comb his hair nor wash his hands before he had put Baldur's killer on the funeral pyre, he kills Hörður. This may seem a little bit strange to us, but I'll come back to why, part of why this may be, that he kills Hörður and not Loki. Now, it is another interesting thing to point out that mistletoe is, of course, a parasitic plant that grows high in the branches of some other tree, an oak, a mesquite, etc. How do you make a spear out of this? Well, one of the traditional explanations is that since the Eddas were written in Iceland, perhaps people had forgotten that mistletoe wasn't a tree, had forgotten what it was at all, since Iceland is nearly treeless. But another explanation that my friend and colleague Merrill Kaplan at Ohio State has recently suggested is that maybe we have lost a story where mistletoe was once a great tree, and it was punished for its role in this killing by being made a little parasitic shoot of a plant. I think there may be something very plausible there, although of course it's impossible to prove that we've lost something, right? Now, after the death of Baldur, he is of course given a grand funeral. He is put upon his ship with some treasure, and he is burned on that ship, although it is only with the help of the giant woman named Hyrrokkin that the gods are able to push the ship out into the sea, because the gods themselves are not strong enough to do it. Thor is so angry at the presence of this giant woman that he actually kicks a little dwarf named Litur into the funeral flames. And at the funeral, Baldur's wife Nanna dies from her grief, and she is then put onto the funeral ship with Baldur. But none of this is burned before Odin can whisper into Baldur's ear something, some mysterious thing that he says to him which whatever it is that he says, only Odin knows it, and that is the riddle with which he wins his trivia contest in Vafthrud the Small, as well as the winning riddle in the riddles of Gestumblindi in the saga of Hermóðr and Heithred. Now, a man called Hermóðr, who may be Odin's son, maybe just a hero in Valhall, a human hero, or could be both. He volunteers when Odin asks for a volunteer in Valhall to go down to Hell to see if Baldur can be bargained out of Hell. So Hermóðr rides to Hell. It is interesting that you can ride from Ósgarður to Hell, but the geographical relations of these realms are a little bit unclear. And when he arrives, he finds that the benches are strewn with straw, there's good mead brewing, and that Baldur's being given a good feast, along with Nanna. And Hermóðr asks, is there anything that the gods can do to get Baldur back? And Hel says, Hel, the daughter of Loki who presides over Hel, the realm of the dead, says that if everything in all the worlds will weep for Baldur, she will send him back. And before returning, Baldur and his wife Nanna give Hermóðr gifts to take back to Odin and Frigg. And Hermóðr comes back and tells the gods how Baldur can be wept out of Hell. And so, of course, messengers are sent through all the realms to ask everything to weep for Baldur. And everything does. And so the messengers are returning to Ósgarður when they encounter in a cave a giant woman who is the last thing that has not been asked to weep for Baldur. And her name is Thok, which means thanks. And they ask her if she will weep for Baldur, but she says that she will not weep for him, as that son of Odin did nothing for her. And it turns out, of course, this is Loki in disguise. Now, Snorri says in the Prose Edda, which is the version of the story in the Eddas that is most complete, that Loki was punished for this by being imprisoned under the earth with a poisonous snake put above him, dripping poison onto his face, and that his wife Sigyn held a bucket underneath the poison. She dumps it out whenever the bucket gets too full, and then the poison falls in Loki's face, and that makes earthquakes. However, in the Poetic Edda, that is Loki's punishment for insulting the gods in Lokasenna, and I think that's probably the older reason for that punishment. And see my video on Lokasenna for more about the details of that punishment, partly because I think Lokasenna is where that really belongs. But there are other versions of the story that point to perhaps more archaic, earlier versions than what we read in the Edda. Again, it's in the Prose Edda by Snorri that we get this detailed version that I've just told you. In the Poetic Edda, we really just get allusions, especially in the poem Völuspá, where we read that Höðr killed Baldur. Loki isn't specifically mentioned as having anything to do with it, although he is mentioned as being punished right after the story of the death of Baldur. But Völuspá is so elusive and jumps from topic to topic that it's not clear that really has anything to do with the death of Baldur. And then, in, of course, the poem Baldur's Drama, which is not in the Codex Regius of the Poetic Edda, it's in AM 748 1 quarto, but it's often included in translations of the Poetic Edda, we have Odin responding to Baldur's bad dreams about dying by going to Hell to find out from a dead witch there what Baldur's bad dreams about dying mean, and of course it means he's going to die and he's going to go to Hell. All right. But it is only in the Prose Edda that we actually get that detailed story in the Eddas. But elsewhere in the Middle Ages, we get other versions of the story, and in particular, I'm thinking of Saxo Grammaticus, a Danish writer roughly contemporary with Snorri, who tells the story of euhemerized gods, Baldrus and Höðrus. Of course, he's writing in Latin, so they have fakey Latinized names. Now, according to Saxo, Baldrus is the son of Othinus, but Baldrus and Höðrus are not brothers. Höðrus is an unrelated man. Höðrus wants to marry a woman named Nanna, but the woman's father is unwilling to marry her to Höðrus because Baldurus also wants to marry her. He happened to see her while she was bathing once, and he got possessed by lust for her. So Höðrus decides he's going to kill Baldurus, but it turns out, according to Höðrus' sources, that only a particular sword owned by someone named Mimingus can kill Baldur. So this is interesting. There's also only one thing that can kill him, although it's a different thing. And of course, Nanna is Baldur's wife in the Icelandic version in the Eddas. All kinds of odd things going on here. Eventually he gets the sword. He ends up fighting Baldurus, Odinus, and of course Thorus in a couple different battles. But toward the end of this long series of conflicts between them, Holdurus ends up killing Baldurus with the sword after he sneaks into his camp. He eats a particular food that makes Baldurus impervious to different harm that's cooked by some special women for him. There's clearly some old mythical elements here that Saxo probably isn't interpreting correctly all the time. And Baldurus happens to see what Saxo calls Proserpina in a vision before he dies. Of course, Proserpina, wife of Hades, in the Greco-Roman tradition, this is probably hell. So what's going on here? And then Baldurus does die. There's no Loki. Holdurus kills Baldurus in a conflict over a woman, and they're not related. You know, there's obviously some common basis for the story here. But what is it? Well, another hint might be in the fact that in Saxo's version, Odinus, after the death of Baldurus, after he's killed by Holdurus, goes and he sleeps with a woman named Rinda, of course, Old Norse Rindr. He actually deceives her. He comes to her in a couple different disguises as a man before Rinda is deceived. Finally, she's never deceived by his disguises as a man. But finally, he comes in the disguise of a woman, tells Rinda's father that Rinda's very sick and she needs to be chained up in order for, you know, this witch woman, Odin, to be able to give her her medicine. They chain her up, and of course, then Odin takes his normal form and rapes her. She has a son named Boas who kills Holdurus. His name is not Voli, but clearly he is the same figure as Voli in the Icelandic tradition. Well, why would Odin father someone else to kill Holdurus in vengeance for Baldur if it weren't for the fact that Holdurus was also his son? Consider that the family really is the main social unit and moral unit of Norse society. So the entire reason, the tragedy of this is that Odin can't legally, morally avenge one son by killing another son. That's why he needs to father another half-brother to that son in order to get him killed. So probably Saxo's version is still drawing on some ultimate older version where Holdurus and Baldurus are brothers. Okay, but there's still some odd elements here that don't quite add up. And if we look toward Finland, in the Kalevala, a collection of what are called runos, songs by Elias Lönnrot, a folklorist who traveled around Finland and adjacent Finnic-speaking areas gathering traditional folklore. It's sort of the Edda of Finland. We find a story of another euhemerized figure, but clearly an old god of Finland, called Lemminkainen. And Lemminkainen is also a very beautiful man. An old blind man kills Lemminkainen. So Lemminkainen's mother goes to every single thing, a little bit like Frigg, although on the other end of the son's death, and asks where her son is. Finally, the son tells the heavenly son, in case that's confusing, tells her where her son is. He's in the underworld. So she goes down to the underworld, fishes out the pieces of her son's body with a special copper rake, I believe it is. And with a magic spell that she learns, I think from a bee, she puts his body back together and brings him back to life. Now, there are clearly some strikingly similar elements here. It is an old blind man that kills a figure associated with great beauty. There is the mother who asks every single thing about something about the death of her son, either to prevent it or about how to kind of reverse it. So I think that probably part of what's happened is that there must be an old Germanic or Norse story about a brother killing a brother that in the Icelandic version has been, and probably in Saxo's version too, has been strongly influenced by an old Finnish story, such as that of Lemminkainen, perhaps not identical to the story of Lemminkainen that we read in Elias Lönnrot's Kalevala. But a very, very early trace of what that old Germanic story might have looked like is in Beowulf. Beowulf is full of digressions. And if you read it, you'll see what I mean. Or if you have read it, you know what I mean. There's many, many different stories told by different people at different points. Just before Beowulf fights the dragon, he recalls the story of Herra Bald, Bald is cognate with Baldur, who was killed by his brother Hyrrokkin. Hath is cognate with Hodr. And he was accidentally killed by an arrow. And the father was so upset because he couldn't kill one son to avenge the other son. Now, I think this is probably the earliest version of that part of the story about a father who is conflicted about how he can't avenge one son on another son who is accidentally killed by an arrow or something thrown or shot, much like Baldur by Hodr. And that later this is turned into a story about gods, or maybe it is originally a story about gods, and Beowulf is turned into a story about humans. And the father finds a way around it by fathering another son to avenge the killer son. But the story of Baldur is ultimately, in the form that we know it from Snorri and in hints from the Eddas and Saxo, one of the great stories of Norse myth, and referred to time and again in the other stories as the greatest tragedy of the Norse gods. For now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.